Welcome back to the Homeschool Advantage podcast. I'm your host, Bex Buzzy. Today's guest, Aimee Deemter, CEO and founder of Spanish Teacher LLC. Aimee has a great story. She fell in love with the language when she traveled to the Dominican Republic on a missions trip, and then thus begins her journey to learning Spanish. Her focus in teaching Spanish is to speak and read as much Spanish at a level her students can understand. She uses repetition through different stories in order to foster memorization. Aimee doesn't feel teaching grammar should be the main focus, but rather it is learned through the use of the language regularly in her missions trip. In this episode, we talk about how homeschooling, the schedule, can be very involved with field trips and other co-op classes, not just the academics. We also talk about how you can teach Spanish without having to give grades. Wow, because all students can learn a language, and depending on their background, the language, the study habits, etc., she realizes every kid learns at a different rate, so why give a grade? Lastly, teaching beginning Spanish to middle school and high school age students with an acquisition-based approach through hearing, reading, and speaking as much Spanish as possible, there is the key to their success. Go grab your coffee, go grab your tea, and a pen and paper, because you're not going to want to miss what Aimee has to say. Aimee, say hello to our guests and tell us, what is one misconception you feel most have about homeschooling?
Hi, everybody, and thanks, Bex, for having me. Probably one misconception I feel that most people have about homeschoolers is that the children aren't socialized, and that is so far from the truth, especially in this day and age. Maybe back 20 years ago, that could have been a thing, but now there's so many co-ops that parents can be a part of, and kids can learn together and then do events together. So many different things. And I would know, since my brother and sister-in-law, they homeschool. And so I'm very aware of what's going on and how socialized they are. So I would say that would be the number one thing, I think.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. A lot of the homeschooled kids that came into my classroom, because I still teach in the public school, and a lot of them that come into my class, they have amazing social skills. Amazing. Like, I'm always like blown away.
I agree. And sometimes it's more than it's better than even kids in public schools, because the parents make the point to look parents in the eyes when you talk to them, and they make a point to slow down your conversation, so it's very, you can tell in a good way.
No, in a great way. You're absolutely right. Parents have a more of a role in teaching those type of socializations, because and then they get to practice it in real time. So that I love. I absolutely love that. And so I want to talk more about you, Senorita, because you teach Spanish online.
Yes, gracias. I do. And yeah. So a little bit about me. I mean, I teach Spanish online. I gear it more towards, so it is towards a homeschool community. So I teach mainly middle schooler and high schoolers. So ages, and this is kind of like a rough range, but 11 to 18. And that's mainly because I have a curriculum that is geared towards kids that age. But I really focus on having more of like an acquisition based teaching where, and all that's just a fancy word for saying I try to speak and read as much Spanish that they understand. That's the key thing. And the way you do that is by limiting the different vocabulary that you introduce, and you do lots of repetition, but you go really deep with your content. It's not so much covering of a ton of content, but it's going really deep. So that's kind of my focus on wanting to teach Spanish, and who I teach it to and how I teach it, all that good stuff.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I love that type of mentality, because you go 1 inch wide, but like 10 feet deep, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And that's really where the learning happens, right? When you're able to apply over and over and over and over and over again, the different skills that you're learning.
Right. And I know just from my experience when I was learning Spanish, and even still to this day, as I'm still communicating with friends from different countries who speak Spanish, I will have heard something one time or even 5 times, and it still benefits me to have a same conversation, but then maybe veer off slightly differently. And so it just really solidifies in your mind like those brain pathways to that language. And so that's really what helps the most.
Yeah. So what got you into Spanish?
Well, I love the language. It started really, I did some mission trips to the Dominican Republic a long time ago. I think it was 7 years ago was my first one, and I couldn't speak any Spanish, and that drove me nuts. And I was like determined. I'm like, I'm going to learn Spanish. And so I taught myself Spanish as I got further along. I took some like a college course, and I would take different courses online. So for the most part, I was self-taught, but I just fell in love with the people. Like the Spanish community, they're so welcoming, so loving, and just the culture. And as I was in the middle of learning, I got offered a kind of like an assistant teaching position at a Spanish immersion school. So I'm doing that, and then I find I had to take over for a teacher one time, and I was like, wow, I really like teaching this. I'm going to go get my teaching certificate. And then so it kind of just kept going because I love the language and I really enjoy teaching it. And I've had many people tell me, you're really good at teaching. You should be a teacher. And I would always blow it off in the past. No, come on. But then finally I'm like, okay, many people are telling me this, I should do it. So that's
And you have like a different method on your teaching, how you approach it and everything. Like you don't give grades.
there's a part in grading, but for learning languages, I don't believe grading is important because everybody can learn a language, but not everybody learns at the same rate. And this is probably across the board for all subjects. People can learn it, it just takes different time. And so when we put grades on people and where we think they should be, that can just really put a ceiling on their learning and put all these filters up so they stop learning. And so I'm just trying to drop as many of those effective filters as possible and just get them to a place where they're comfortable and
Sure.
willing to just be out there taking risks and just learn. So grading was one thing I was like, that's out of here, because I'm still assessing it. The grading isn't necessary. So
Yeah, we're always assessing, right? Like, especially when it comes down to foreign language, how easy is it to assess where the student is? It's super easy. If I'm having a conversation with you and you can respond back to me, we're moving on. But if you
right,
can't, you know what? Let's just circle back and get
right.
you, where you need to be able to have this type of conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That's really cool. That's really cool. So DR, that's like the one place I haven't still gone to. I grew up actually in Puerto Rico,
Wow.
and I loved it. My family and I, that's why I actually learned to speak Spanish. I learned it, immersively. I
Mhm.
didn't learn it in school or whatever. That's actually how I learned English too,
Wow.
immersively.
Wow. You speak it very well, English. I've heard Spanish, but I'm assuming you have amazing Spanish. So
Yeah, I
awesome.
mean, well, I learned when I was a little kid and I learned both languages at the same exact time.
Mm.
And what was so funny is when I came over to the United States, I remember telling my mom, ahora no vamos a hablar español. And I was like,
Ah!
estamos en los Estados Unidos. And she's like, what? And what I just finished saying was, now I don't speak Spanish. I'm in United States.
Yes.
And I stopped speaking Spanish for a really long time. And I was able to understand it. I mean, like I could speak it, but I just always chose not to. I don't even know why. I had like this bad idea of you don't speak Spanish here.
Mm.
And I really, really held myself back on a lot of things because learning a second language, third, or even fourth language is not just about knowing a different language just to communicate, but it also opens up your world. Like your
Mm-hmm.
world is no longer limited and you see things differently because your vocabulary gives you eyes to see things, believe it or
Yes.
not. The more vocabulary you have, the more things you're able to experience and be
Mm-hmm.
able to interact with and be able to, grow from.
Mm-hmm.
So, I really did hold myself back for a long, long time with that. And I went back to college, and believe it or not, guess what I became? I
Mm.
also became a Spanish teacher.
Yes, no way. That's so
I
cool.
Yeah, I taught Spanish for 20 years, and I just remember going back to school for Spanish after getting a biology and a chemistry degree
Mhm.
because they needed a Spanish teacher. And I was like, but I'm a biologist. And they're like,
Yeah.
well, we don't need that. We need a Spanish teacher. And your last name is Martinez. I was like,
Perfect, right?
okay.
Yeah.
That was it. So I went back to school and I actually studied for another 4 years and I went to Spain because my
Wow.
family is from Spain. So I actually went there and it was probably one of the most amazing experiences of my life, but it
Mm,
also really gave me, and really interestingly enough, um, going to Spain, albeit such a beautiful country and it was such an amazing experience and my family was from there, I really began to appreciate who I was as an American, which was
mm,
crazy how
mm.
that happened. But
Yeah.
yeah, I came home thankful that I was an American, but an American who was really able to see more because my vocabulary was that much greater. So I think
Mhm.
it's awesome what you're doing. I think it's awesome. You know, you took the plunge and you went there and you learned a foreign language. So you
Yeah.
learned it at a later age. Was it more
Yes.
difficult you felt to learn it at a later age?
I guess I wouldn't know since I didn't learn at a younger age, but
True.
I know that I was able to learn it, and just like every student, like learn it very quickly at the beginning. They have like that really beginning phase, and then you kind of have that intermediate plateau. Was there for a little bit, and then kind of once I just dove in deeper and just studied harder and just just kind of just did it. I did get to that advanced level, and so I would say probably maybe it was a little harder, but I have I have such good study skills. I know all the things to do to set myself up for success. I almost want to say no. And I don't even like to put like an age restriction on learning a language, but it all depends on like your experience with the language prior, your study habits, all those things are a factor in it. And so I would just encourage anybody thinking about it to do it. Like don't let the age hold you back. Like
Right,
it's
right. And
worth
that's
it to
why I
go.
mentioned that because, when you have an affinity to do something, those mental blocks are going to come off.
Mhm.
And I love that you said you have like really great study skills. So when a student comes to you, you probably apply all those study skills that you've learned,
Mhm.
to teach, your students.
Yes, yes, I do. So, like right now, like one of the biggest things I actually teach my students is we spend time the first class actually going over goals and setting goals, and for them to just analyze their progress and just like what are SMART goals? Everybody knows that acronym, and so setting up that, but then also like checking back in with them and saying, I would always ask myself these questions. Can I say this? If I can't say this, I need to dive back into it. And so just encouraging them to go over their notes that I have key for them to help them advance and just really focusing on always, can I say this in Spanish? And if I can't, then I need to go back and reapply it, re-say it all over again. So
So like walk me through one of your lessons because you mentioned that you have it very student centered by
mhm,
making all the material very relevant
yes.
and helping engage. So what does that look like? What would a lesson look like with you?
So a lesson I always start off with kind of like your basics, like getting somebody like when you first meet somebody saying, hi, how are you? So then we'll talk about how we're feeling, and then I'll have my students ask me because I think it's polite when you're talking with somebody. The conversation's never one way. Like I want somebody to ask me, how am I doing? So we'll spend time doing the very like those basic like things, and then we'll get into the meat of the lesson, which would be like say learning some core vocabulary. And I don't teach it in the sense where like I'll teach them like the grammar of like say to have, like all the different the I, to, you, the we, all those forms. I'll give them it in Spanish, then I'll give them the English equivalent, and I limit it to like say the he has, and then maybe like some other core vocabulary. And so then right away I will give pictures and that'll like pertain to that vocabulary, and it'll all be in Spanish at this point. And so asking just yes or no questions in Spanish, and then kind of leading them with like, is it this or is it this? And so even if they don't know the Spanish word, I'm guiding them and how to automatically speak it. So then where the tailored comes into is like I will, for example, we were just doing family members, so using their families to get them to describe like I have this many families, and then we have to like describe like a characteristic of them. So getting used to saying like they are, and going through every single family member. And so I'll do that with my family, and I'll ask questions as we're going. So they're getting a lot of input, and they're hearing it again and again and again. And even after hearing it again and again and again, you still need to hear it again and again and again. So like, even if they are getting frustrated or whatever, I'm like, just relax. It will come. It just needs to have the input. That's it.
Yeah, it sounds like you have a lot of patience.
I think you have to when you're learning a language.
Yeah, and you know what? That really makes kids feel honestly, besides kids, it makes anyone feel, like they can accomplish this when someone just has patience with them and really sees them. And I'm sure that a lot of your students recognize that in you.
Yeah, they do. I love it. And I just like think the best compliment is like wanting to take more, because as homeschool kids, parents pay for this, right? It's not just something that you get in a high school that they just have to take. It's something that they want to take. And so there's that extra element too, is like, it makes it more fun because the students really want to learn. So there's that aspect too. But yeah, they'll say nice things like that. You're a good teacher. Thank you. And things like that. So those are always rewarding to hear, of course.
Yeah. Well, it makes what you're doing feel like worthwhile. I know
Yeah.
when I get those notes from my students, I'm like, "Oh, okay, I could do this another year."
Yes.
It only takes one little note to like melt a teacher's heart, believe it or not.
Oh, I do believe it. That's awesome.
That's so cool. So tell us, like, what's the call to action? Where can they, find your resources or, register for one of your classes?
Yeah. So right now, Facebook would probably be the best way to reach me. And I am the Spanish teacher. There is an LLC on that. So if you type in the Spanish Teacher LLC, my name is Aimee Deemter. So you probably would see that attached to it. But that would probably be the best way, through Messenger, or they can reach me through my email, which is the Spanish Teacher Online at gmail.com. But yes, I have a class starting December 1st, Thursday. Awesome. And so that's the next class coming up. And to get registered for that, they'd have to contact me and to talk to them about that. So
awesome. How long is that class going to be?
So it's 8 weeks long, 1 hour a week. It's done virtually. All my classes are done virtually. And we use Google Classrooms. So I do post assignments for them, everything that we've learned that week to help them retain and practice things that we've studied during that week. So 8 weeks long.
That's not bad. And so it's an 8-week course and they get 1 credit?
No, I would say so there's always a tricky trying to figure out credits for homeschool, but I recently was just talking to a parent about this. I would say 3 8-week courses would be about 1 credit.
Oh, okay. Got it.
So because it includes like certain hours of study and like input, all that kind of stuff. So
perfect.
But that would just be the first 8-week course. And then each course after that is progressive. Like it builds on the course prior to that.
Oh, that's really cool. Okay, cool. Very good. And I think you only need 4 credits, right? For a high school student to be able to, or is it 2 credits?
It's 2, I think it's 2 years is it? So
yeah,
and
2 credits.
And I know homeschool, some states don't even require it. So it's really based on what parents, some states do, some states don't. And so it's really based on what the parents want their kid, or even what the student wants to learn, because learning a second language is so beneficial for your future and jobs, and just,
oh my gosh,
like you said, opening your eyes up to different worlds and culture. And it's just amazing.
Yeah. I've actually been able to get better jobs, and I've been chosen over lots of other people because of my, dual language. And the more you have, just the more valuable you are to different people, different situations, and just learning a second language, like the fact that I speak Spanish, I can understand Italian with no problem. Right. So it's like really easy.
Yes.
And
those
then
Romance languages are just so like similar, like Italian, Spanish, and it helps me learn English better. Really, I can speak it better because I've learned Spanish better.
It's actually true. In fact, that's so funny you said that, because I've actually taught English grammar through teaching Spanish grammar to a lot of my students who didn't know their English grammar, because I was like, oh, well, now I got to teach you English grammar. Let's do a comparison, contrast and compare. So yeah, that is so cool. Oh, wow. So it's been really great having you on today. So as we're wrapping up, what is one thing you want to impart to parents from your experience and your understanding of the homeschool education journey and experience that you'd want them
Mhm.
to take away from our conversation today?
Wow, that's a good question. I would say, well, my journey in learning a language was that of like really kind of spinning my tires and not really knowing where to go. And a lot of times that can be the same for homeschooled parents. You don't know which way to go. And so I just encourage parents highly to just reach out to people who do that. Like for me, being a professional and teaching Spanish, I can help you and I can help your student find the pathway to learning the language. So
Mhm.
don't be shy in reaching out.
Awesome. That's right. I think that's a huge big takeaway, right? Like,
Hmm.
don't be shy, reach out, find out, get the information, and then you can make a decision
Yes.
informedly.
Yes, exactly.
Awesome. Amy, it was so great talking with you today and just hearing all of your experience and, your testimony and just all of your knowledge and just understanding the language as well. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Yes, thank you, Bex.
If you love the conversations we're having here on the Homeschool Advantage podcast, follow or subscribe our podcast to stay in the loop and never miss this amazing content. And please highly consider taking a minute to leave a positive rating and review to help others like you discover this show. See you next time.